After your supplies are set up, as I've shown in the video getting started, you should begin with mixing colors. All the time you spend doing these color mixing exercises will serve you well and save you time later. I'll show you a definite procedure to keep the colors from looking muddy, and as you do these exercises you'll also learn more about the ratio of water to paint, and you'll become more familiar with all your colors. So let's get started. The first thing is make sure all your colors are nice and moist. They should be a little bit goopy. You should be able to get them out of the little wells without any problem. If you have to scrub the color to get it out, it's not moist enough. There shouldn't be water floating all over the paint, but they should still be nice and soft. The next thing is make sure everything is clean. The colors, your palette, your brush, your water, everything. The colors, especially softer colors like cerulean blue, can get contaminated really easy. So you want to make sure everything is clean and kept clean. Now, to start out, get your brush nice and wet and then snap it to get rid of some of the excess water, or you can wipe it on a towel or a rag. That way it doesn't carry too much water into the color mixing. We'll do an example here. This is just cerulean blue. And for color mixing, I want you to put the colors down next to each other, but don't let them touch. Just like that. Then clean your brush out again. Do not stir the colors up. I'll show you what I mean. Here they are next to each other. This is what I don't want you to do. Start doing that. That just makes muddy color, and it doesn't work as well, particularly in watercolor. So again, put the color down, first color, clean the brush, shake some of the water out, put the next color next to it, and then just barely push the two together like that. This is an exercise on color mixing, and it's where you start with the first color on your palette. In this case it's cadmium red, and you work your way around and you mix it each time with a different color on your palette. I'll skip ahead here a little bit. This one is with alizarin crimson. So it's cadmium red and alizarin crimson. Now, when you do that, you want to label it underneath. And then the next one, you go back to cadmium red, and the next color on your palette, I'm going to skip ahead again. This time I'm using cadmium yellow with cadmium red, making another square, and I would label that. And what you do is you work your way, starting with one color, mix it with every other color on your palette. Then you go to the next color and you do the same thing. Mix it with every other color on your palette. Try to get the squares fairly even. This gives you a wonderful opportunity to work on how much water and paint to use. You'll be doing it over and over and over, and the mixture of water and paint will become second nature. What you end up with is sheets like this. This one is for cadmium red, and it's mixed with other colors on my palette in a proper order. And if you do it on sheets like this, so the same size, then you can keep the sheets together in a folder, or you can bind them together in a book. But what you want is sheets like this that you can use for reference, so that when you're trying to figure out how to mix a certain color, you can go through these sheets and see how to come close to it. And when I was in art school at Ohio State, We had to do this exercise when I was a freshman. And then we carried our folder or our book around for another year or two. And the students who used it the most ended up being the best at color mixing. So this is an exercise that I really advise people to do. You'll find it very helpful. Another way to check whether you're using the right amount of water to paint is at some point just tip your palette. Now, color ran out of the wells, but here where the color's mixed, it's barely moving at all. That means I've probably got just about the right ratio of water to paint. Now we're going to work on mixing grays. I don't use Payne's gray or Davies gray or any of the grays that come in a tube because I like to mix my own grays. That way I can make them more interesting. I can control the temperature, whether I want them to be warm or cool. And I can control the value better. And I just, when I was learning to paint in watercolor, I always started out mixing grays, and I'm glad I did. It's been an important part of my painting ever since. So I'm going to start with, in this case, cerulean blue. Put a nice bit of it down. Clean my brush. Take some of the water out of it. And in this case, I'm going to use alizarin crimson, which is a nice warm red. I'm putting them next to each other. I'm going to clean my brush again and move them together. In this case, the red was a little overwhelming, so I'm going to add a little bit of more blue to it, and I'm going to add that right on the paper rather than on the palette. There we go. Got a nice gray color. So each time you do it, I can take the same two colors, cerulean blue again, and the red, put them next to each other, clean my brush out, push the two together. Each time I do it, I'll get a little bit different gray, but you still should be able to see bits of red in there, bits of blue. Cerulean blue, as well as the gray that the two mix. Now for another gray that I use a lot in my paintings, I'm taking some burnt sienna, putting a nice rich amount of it down on my palette, cleaning the brush up, shaking some of the water out of it, and I'm using ultramarine blue, cleaning my brush again. Now these are two darker colors, two warm colors, and they'll make a nice rich dark gray. Now with this one you can see some of the blue, ultramarine blue, some of burnt sienna, and the gray that they make. I'm going to add a little more blue to it right here on the palette, or right on the paper, I mean. So that makes a nice rich gray, and you can see some of the brown, some of the blue, and some of the gray that they make together. Now I want to show you a nice gray color that you can mix with three colors. And for this one, you want to really be careful not to stir up the colors. I'm going to start with cerulean blue. Some of that out on the paper, on the palette. This is cobalt violet. And put some of that down. Again, I don't have them touching. And then some yellow ochre. So there's some of each color on there. Now when I stir them together, the yellow ochre is a little overwhelming, so I'm going to add some more cerulean blue, some more cobalt violet, Makes a beautiful gray color. And you can see bits of each of the little colors in there. Add a little more yellow ochre to it. Let's put a little more cerulean blue in here. I do a lot of color mixing right on the paper. In this case, you can see some of the yellow ochre, some of the cobalt violet, some of the cerulean blue, and the gray that the three colors mix together. Now we're going to mix some greens. I have a color called olive green on my palette. It's by Winsor Newton. It's a color that I use a lot, particularly in landscapes. So I'm going to put out some of that green, and I'm going to add lemon yellow. Put that over here, and put the two together. Makes a nice yellow-green, spring green. And since it was added yellow to it, it made a warm green. So I'm going to start with the olive green again. This time I'm going to add some cerulean blue to it. Put it over here. Get a little bit more. And move the two together without stirring it up much. This makes a cooler green because I added blue to the olive. And both of those you can see little bits and pieces of each of the colors that I used in the mixture. I'm going to put some of the olive green down just so you can see it by itself. Now typically most of the greens I use I mix from the very beginning with yellow and blue. So this time I'm using cerulean blue. Clean my brush. I'll add a little lemon yellow to it. Put the two together. A little more cerulean blue in there. Makes a nice green, and you can see some of the blue, some of the yellow, and then the green that the two make. Now I'm going to use some manganese blue, which has a little bit more of an aqua tint to it. And I'll put some lemon yellow with that. Barely push the two together. Makes a beautiful green, and you can see some of the yellow and some of the blue. I'm going to show you one more green mixture. This time I'm using ultramarine blue, which is a rich dark blue. Clean out my brush. I'm going to put some cadmium yellow with it. A little bit more of the blue. That makes a beautiful green, and yet you can still see little bits of each color that I used. Now when I'm painting summer landscapes, there's so much green out there that it's really important to learn how to mix all the different greens that you can. It's an infinite number. You can keep going forever. But try to figure out which ones are warm and which ones are cool. For example, this one has more blue in it. It's a cooler green. This one has more yellow in it. It's more of a yellow green. This one's a little bit more of a neutral green. So the way to keep summer landscapes interesting is to be able to really control the greens in your painting. The more of them you can use, the more temperature changes you can use, the more exciting the painting will be. Now when you're painting, anytime you stop like this is what the palette should look like. It should have bits of color everywhere, but it should not be all stirred up. You should still be able to see nice, rich, clean colors on the palette like that. And if you tip it, see how the colors barely run at all? That means I probably used the right amount of water to paint. I use quite a few colors on my palette. For my studio palette, I have about 24 colors. For my plein air palette, I have about 16. And for me, that's really important because it means I have to use fewer colors to make the mixtures that I want. And I think that's really important in watercolor painting. If you try to just use a couple different colors or a few colors, 4 or 6, something like that, and mix all your colors out of that, I find that the colors get dull and a little bit muddy. And a lot of these colors on my palette I use directly out of the tube. I don't mix them with anything. And I've gotten very used to using them over the years. And those are the reasons I like to use a lot of colors on my palette. So practice color mixing. Do color charts like I told you, where you start with one color and mix it with every other color on your palette, and then go to another color, mix it with every other color on your palette. All those little exercises, all that color mixing will make you a better painter, and it'll give you much more control over your colors. And keep a scrap of watercolor paper handy so that you can try the colors out on that before you put them into a painting. That way you can check it, see if it's the color you want, if it's the temperature you want, if it's the value you want, and that'll be really helpful if you do that before you put it right into the painting. So this is Dennis Pendleton saying keep practicing color mixing and keep on painting.